Alright guys, welcome back for Game 2 of the Coral Springs, Florida Finals for the City Championship. First game we saw Harrison get off to a blazing fast start with his Chandelure, Dodrio, Vileplume deck, and Luke just kind of sat there and didn't get to do much. And now this game we are seeing a horrible start from Luke. He's starting with his lone Cobalion, has a 2 retreat cost. This is an unfortunate occurrence. When you play Cobalion, you do take a risk that you can start with it. It has a 2 retreat cost. It's played to give Durant an actual attacker later on in the game. If your opponent just has maybe one Pokemon attacking you the whole game and Durant's not going to get the job done, you play a Cobalion. Since you're already playing Metal Energy, you might as well. You can power him up with Eviolite and Special Metals and turn him into a tank at the end of the game and really just kind of overrun your opponent if they didn't bench too much stuff. So, a good card, but it's high risk, high reward. Here, the risk definitely biting Luke in the butt. It has a 2 retreat cost, so he won't be able to devour until turn 3 at the earliest. And then even if he does that, and there's the double tails on the dual ball, even if Luke were to do that, Harrison does play Lampent, which has Luring Light, which can drag out that Cobalion again, and it's just going to be a pain. It has a 2 retreat cost, so once Harrison gets Vileplume into play, Lampent, Luring Light can just drag out Cobalion, and if Luke were to retreat that Cobalion, he'd have to pay the 2 retreat cost again, and it just would not be pretty. So he's actually forced to either attack with it, or somehow get a Seeker and get it off of his field completely. This is the downside to running Cobalion. We'll see if it ends up costing him the game. It certainly could. This is the ugliest way to start off when you play Durant with this Cobalion, but it's a long game. You know, Chandelure is by no means a speedy deck unless you take into account Harrison's start last game, but I don't think the game is over just because Luke started with that. And we'll see. So here's a Sage's Training for 5. This is not a card you really want to play against Durant, but you will sometimes. Now Harrison plays a Sage. He actually discards a Twins, a Jirachi, and looks like there's a Chansey and a Blissey. I think he should actually hold on to the Twins there. I don't see... Yeah, he's deciding between the Chansey and the Blissey. I don't think he needs to play either of those in this matchup, so he's actually going to get rid of the Blissey and keep the Chansey. I would actually keep the Twins there if I were him, knowing that Cobalion's going to have to attack. That Twins actually will come in handy later. So, questionable choice on the Sage. I'm not sure if it'll make too big of a difference, but honestly, it discarded 3 cards from his deck that probably aren't going to be helpful anytime soon. So when he ekes here, it'll thin his deck of bad cards so he doesn't draw into them again. Now, once again, it's going to come down to how quickly will Harrison get Vileplume into play, and then following that, how quickly will he get Chandelure into play. Now, it's actually going to be a little easier because Luke's going to be forced into this Cobalion route, but for the most part, it's going to take a while. I mean, it's much easier when you have access to Twins. You're able to search out Lampent and Chandelure, but honestly, once you get Vileplume out, you limit your own trainers as well. Your Rare Candy, your Pokemon Communication, those are all limited when you get Vileplume into play, and it makes it tougher for you to get your own evolutions out, so it might end up not being a great thing. Now, right now, Harrison does get a Collector off of his Eek. His Cleffa does stay asleep, however. It might wake up going into Luke's turn, and if that's the case, we could see Cleffa get knocked out. And if Harrison doesn't have a very strong hand, this could be a big turning point in the match. Even though Luke starts with Cobalion, he could potentially prevent Harrison from setting up at all. If Cleffa gets knocked out and he just has a bad hand, Cobalion could just run through all of his stuff, and he could end up winning the game still. So it's hard to tell what will happen from this point. You never know what will happen with a big clunky setup deck like Chandelure, because there's so many Pokemon that you need to get into play. You need to get the Vileplume, you need to get Chandelure, then you need Dodrio, and you need to do it quickly. So, looks like his hand is okay, not the strongest. And look, Cleffa will stay asleep again. Now Luke does play catcher, so he'll be able to target something down. I assume he would go for probably Dodrio, just because there are 2 Oddishes and 2 Litwicks out, and Dodrio is actually what makes the Chandelure deck run. With the Pokebody, I think it's called Retreat Aid, it gives 2 less retreat to your active Pokemon, so every time you use Cursed Shadow, you can retreat to another Chandelure and use another Cursed Shadow ability. But without Dodrio, you can only use 1 per turn, and Chandelure is limited to just that 30 damage every turn, which is not going to get the job done. So, I do see Luke has another Oak's New Theory, and he decides, yep, I am just going straight ahead with Cobalion. I don't think I can win if I retreat him because of the Lampent. Luring Light will just drag him back out, and he's just going to be a liability the rest of the game. So, Luke comes to that conclusion. He says, alright, this is not what I wanted to do, but this is what I have to do. So, a good thing he realized that right away. So he does have a catcher in his hand, and yes, he goes right for the Dodrio. I like this decision. We'll see what else he does. He does have a Junk Arm. Of course, oh, there's an Alpha Lithograph as well, so he's going to be able to look at his prizes and see what he wants to take out of there. Now, one of the interesting things when you knock out this Dodrio, you don't know whether or not Harrison has a Twins in his hand. You don't know whether or not he has the cards to get a Rare Candy Vileplume next turn, so you want to play as many trainers out of your hand as possible this turn so that you're not stuck with them later when Vileplume comes into play. So he does have a Junk Arm in his hand. He probably wants to play it right now just to get rid of some trainers. He's going to get rid of a Twins and a Crushing Hammer. Probably, yep, go for the Dual Ball. That's one thing he can play this turn and not have to worry about it. And there we go, 2 heads on Dual Ball. So, things going much better for Luke this game than it did last game. Of course, he did start with Cobalion, so they're not going great. But, I mean, all things considered, this is probably the best he could have hoped for with the Cobalion start. Harrison did not get as good of a start as he did the previous game, so things are going well. Now, we did see in Luke's prizes, he was able to see them with Alpha Lithograph. There was a Juniper in there, so he can Iron Breaker, get the knockout, and then take the Juniper out of his prizes, and he'll be able to have a fresh new hand of 7 next turn. So, not sure whether or not he wants to do that, but oh, we're just taking a second here. You actually are allowed to take notes on what's in your prizes, so he's just going to write them down real quick. This is something that was recently put into the rules, I think last year, with Azelf's Time Walk Pokepower, when people would look at their prizes nearly every game, and at first you were not allowed to take notes on what prizes you had, but after a while they decided, okay, you can just take notes, write down what's in there, and make it simpler. So, less taxing on your memory, and just makes it simpler. Takes up a little time, which can be annoying, but for the most part, it's okay. Now, what this will allow Luke to do is actually rearrange the top card of his deck, so he can actually manipulate what his next 2 things will be. So the first one, I'm not sure what he's going to get, but I'm sure one of them is going to be a Juniper. I didn't catch what else was in his prizes, so he's going to control his top card and take his prize. So he actually decides he doesn't really care what else is in his prizes. And oh, there's a Twins from Harrison, and this has got a, well, give Luke a bad feeling in the pit of his stomach. Vileplume is coming to town, and there's not much you can do about it. It's gonna be a Rare Candy Vileplume, and yep, there we go. No Lampent though. This is what I was saying. When you do get Vileplume out, sure, it's great, but it's gonna take you a while to get your evolutions out, and oh, looks like Harrison, his Cleffa stays asleep. It's gonna buy him a turn, and once again, things are looking ugly for Luke Reed. You would want to be devouring at this point, but you just can't. I mean, this is 2 games in a row where we're 4 turns into the game, and he hasn't used Devour yet, so this is just not a situation you want to be in. And look at that, Harrison has 2 Lampents in his hand. Wow, what more could you ask for if you're Harrison? That's just not good for Luke. So he's going to draw 7 here. And, I mean, it might be time for him to just retreat and use Devour here. It's going to be a risk because of Lampent's Luring Light, but it might be his best shot at winning the game at this point. I don't know if he can afford to pass the turn with the Cobalion active. He might have to take the risk, but it is a very big risk if he does retreat. So, I don't know. It's a very, very difficult decision. And looks like he's going to decide to retreat. So here we go. He actually puts the basic metal in the discard pile, so he can use Flower Shop for it, lady, if he plays that, which is a very smart move. And here we go. Here's a Devour for 4, and there's a Chandelure. So, hey, maybe that helped him out. And if Cleffa stays asleep again, which it did, this is going to be big. He gets a free turn of Devour, free of Chandelure, and maybe things can go well for Luke here. There are still a lot of cards left in Harrison's deck, and Cleffa stays asleep again. But, you know, if he keeps devouring, Harrison actually did not use did not play the N in his hand. Sorry, he couldn't use Eek, he was asleep, but he didn't use the N in his hand, which was kind of strange. He does have Dodrio, but he does not have a Chandelure in his hand, so I'm not sure what's going on there. He maybe realizes how important it is to get Dodrio into play, so he just holds on to the Dodrio and just waits for next turn. Then he'll play the N, I'm sure. And now Luke will Oak's New Theory again for a new hand of 6. And see if he's got anything else he can play. He probably wants more energy, so he can put him onto Cobalion. But here's another Devour for 4. We see... Okay, no Chandelures. Those are the big cards you got to look out for here. And Harrison stays asleep once again. Wow. So, lots of lazy babies in these games so far. Nothing really going well for Harrison. I mean, he does have the Vileplume into play and 2 Lampents, so things aren't all bad. Now, Luke does have a Metal Energy. He should put that on the Cobalion, I would think. Unless he has Seeker in his hand, then I would go ahead and Seeker. But actually decides to put it on Durant. I don't know how I feel about that play. I think I would rather have the Cobalion powered up in case of Luring Light. You know, that's going to be really annoying if that Cobalion gets stuck in the active spot. But there we go, there's a Seeker in his hand now that he's Junipered. So, next turn he will be able to get it off of his field no matter what. Unless, of course, Harrison were to play that N in his hand. So, right now we're getting down to the wire. It's going to be really close these next few turns. It's going to come down to whether or not Harrison can get some Chandelures into play, start using Cursed Shadow, and alright, there's a Twins, but no Chandelures, and wow, he top decks a Chandelure. That could not have gone better for Harrison. He does have that N in his hand still. We'll see if he uses it. He might save it for later to prevent himself from decking, but no, he decides not to. So, now Luke's got some decisions to make. He has that Seeker in his hand, of course. He could retreat and Seeker up his Durant. That has damage on it. That would be a way to kind of set Harrison back a turn. But he's just going to decide to Devour for 4. Let's see what he gets. Nope, no Chandelure still, so Harrison could still top deck into another one, but he does not. I'm unsure as to why Harrison would would not play that N in his hand. He really needs to get more Chandelures into play. I realize you're drawing cards, but if you get a second Chandelure into play, you're really putting a clock on the Durant player. You're knocking out those Durants very quickly, and it's just going to make it that much harder for Luke to actually win the game. But there we go. There's a Cursed Shadow, and Harrison's actually going to retreat to Lampent this turn, which is a nice idea. In case he does top deck another Chandelure. And he's just going to pass. So, now Luke does have the Seeker in his hand. He could Seeker up his own Durant. That would be a big move in this game. There we go. There's a Seeker, and he picks up his Durant, and this is a big turning point in the game. Basically, Harrison has wasted his previous 2 turns now. Maybe he should have used Curse Shadow differently. Maybe spreading damage out to other Durants. There was no reason for him to put all 3 on that one Durant. Now Seeker has really taken its toll. It's going to set Harrison back 2 turns. So even though Luke started off so poorly with that Cobalion, now things are looking up for him. He's devouring Harrison's deck very quickly, and now Harrison decides it might be time to play the N, and I think at this point it might be a little late. Even if he does not, even if he, I'm not sure, if he starts knocking out Durant at this point, I don't know if he'll have enough time. If Luke can keep devouring for 3 and then 2, I don't think Harrison will have enough time to put cards back in his deck, or if he'll have any way to put cards back in his deck, and if he'll have time to knock out Durant in time. So maybe the damage has already been done. Maybe Luke has gotten too far ahead with his Devours. It's very hard to tell. One of the ways I could see Harrison winning is using Luring Light and bringing out that Cobalion to stall for time, and maybe Luke just runs out of energy, something like that. Otherwise, I don't know what he can do to win. So Luke is going to draw. He's going to draw his 5 cards. Harrison will draw 6. There's no Chandelure, no energy, and Harrison looks upset. That was really his way to come back in the game, but without Luring Light, I don't think he can do anything. And he's just going to put 3 on the Durant and pass. Now Luke, he could sure use an energy this turn. He does not have one in his hand, and it would appear, so the Luring Light trick would be devastating for him. And look at that, Harrison's out of cards, so that will be the first game that Luke wins. That will be the end of game 2, and there's Harrison showing his prizes. And we're going to move on to a game 3 here at the Coral Springs City Championship. We'll be right back for game 3. We're tied 1-1 in this exciting series. So stay tuned, we'll be right back.